This is the Misdirected Mark Podcast, a podcast about gaming, game mastering, and entertaining you, our listeners. We are explicit, you have been warned, and I'd like to thank Mike Willard for letting us use his music on our show. Now let's pick up those mics and get on with this thing.
Alright, just a little more, just go a little bit farther, and...
What you doing, Chris?
Boom!
Oh, look. That orc's carrying a bunch of human heads is running away. It looks like you scared him off.
Should we chase him?
No, don't. There's a trap in the clearing, and I don't want either of you to get snagged in it, okay?
You know we're talking about trappings tonight, not traps, right? Trappings, not traps.
Seriously? No.
Trappings, not traps.
What'd he say?
Just let me tear up all the show notes.
Wait. You know, you could have kept those and we could have used them another week.
You know, damn it, Phil, just start the show.
And welcome to the 374th episode of the Misdirected Mark Podcast, where we'll be talking about the narrative and mechanical properties of trappings in RPGs. But first, my name is Phil.
My name is Chris.
And I'm Old Man Logan.
Hey, what's the Misdirected Mark Podcast? It must be Tuesday night at 8 p.m.
There you go. I got here as fast as I could.
You did fine. Coming from Queen's Standard Time.
Yes.
Is that the Queen's time?
I was in Mountain Time this morning.
But now
now I'm on Eastern, and I'm drinking coffee like there's no tomorrow.
You know, aren't you? And you're like leaving tomorrow morning to go to
a business trip.
Yeah, business trip.
That's in the same time zone, though.
Oh, yeah, true. In the middle of this state.
And somebody's driving.
Oh, so you can sleep.
I may do that.
Well, with that being stated, let's talk about one thing. So, Phil, what is your one thing?
I went to Denver.
You did go to Denver.
I went to Denver.
What was the coolest thing that you did in Denver?
Well, got to I got to
such a loaded question.
Right. I got to record a live episode of Pandas.
That's pretty cool.
That's awesome. Play test some Ditch Lilies.
Mm-hmm.
Finish a little game called Connections, which you'll hear about in I don't know somewhere in the future, and hung out, did a bunch of cool things. Had our as we talked about on Pandas, we had our '90s teen movie exchange. I watched 10 Things About You.
10 Things I Hate About You.
10 Things I Hate About You, which I had never seen before, which was excellent. And Senda watched Can't Hardly Wait.
Can't Hardly Wait. That's so cute with Jennifer Love Hewitt.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that movie.
I like 10 Things I Hate About You much more. But
yeah.
It's because it's a Shakespeare redone for teen comedy.
Yeah, I get it. It was excellent, right? It was. It's a very good. It's a very fun movie. Anyway,
I don't even know what that was.
That was my phone.
Okay. It's way better than, it's based on The Taming of the Shrew. It's way better than The Taming of the Shrew.
Yeah.
The Taming of the Shrew is actually terribly sexist.
Yes.
I would imagine.
Yes.
So,
how would you rank it with Cruel Intentions?
Cruel Intentions is a piece of shit.
I love Cruel Intentions. What's wrong with you?
Because there's nothing ethical about any of those things those people are doing.
No, they're horrible people.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's why.
Well, it's okay. Well, it's a movie about horrible people doing basically horrible things, with some sort of trying to have some sort of shitty redemption at the end.
Yeah, I mean,
no spoilers.
Blake Ryan's got my back here.
Yeah.
The Batman has my back, so I feel justified now. If you don't know what I'm talking about, everybody, watch the Twitch stream.
Yes.
Cool. So you were in Denver.
I was. I had a lot of fun. It was a cool weekend.
Bob, one thing.
So, being a daywalker is the best.
Is it?
Yes. Last weekend was the first weekend in a long time where I didn't have to work the Sunday over.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah. And my body was like, you need to sleep in the middle of Saturday afternoon. And I'm like, no, I don't. Yeah, you do. I'm like, no, that was last week. Now this is, no, don't. So I'm sure another week will be kind of wonky before I finally settle into it, but it's nice.
Still awesome.
That is pretty awesome.
Very awesome.
Congratulations.
Yay. Ooh, yeah. What about you?
I watched all of Undone on Saturday. So Undone is this series that's on Amazon. It's 8 episodes long. It's using rotoscoped animation. They filmed it, and then they rotoscoped the stuff over the top of it. But it's like people are mentioning Scanner Darkly. I've never seen Scanner Darkly. I've seen Waking Life, which does a lot of that. If you like philosophy, you should watch Waking Life. This one, a lot of the backgrounds they did oil paintings for, which makes it look really different. And the story is really quite fantastic, in my opinion. It is, if you are interested in stories about mental health or time travel, then you should watch it. Well, if you're interested in stories about both of those things and their intersection, you should probably watch it. It's really good.
Interesting.
Cool.
That's my one thing. So let's get to announcements, right?
Let's.
Makes sense.
Let's do the announcements.
What was that?
I don't know.
Was that like your demon voice?
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, you tried to dig deep down for that one, too.
I'm not. I don't have a very deep voice. That's just
That's okay. You don't have to have a deep voice to have an authoritative voice.
Oh, no, you don't.
No, you don't.
All right, so the FM Gamers, that is the one of the new shows that is coming to Misdirected Mark on our new Twitch channel, which is not going to be this one. That starts September 30th. So twitch.tv/misdirectedmark. That is going to be the new Twitch station for us.
Let's repeat this. Because we're moving over to that as well.
Yes, we are.
So
all the shows are going there that are going to be on it.
Yes, so you need to start getting ready to move over. Like we did this back when we moved the RSS feed and stuff like that, right?
Yep.
We're giving you advanced warning. Is the channel actually up yet? Like if you went to it right now, is it just okay? So people should start like going into Twitch and liking it.
Yeah.
So that you can find it later.
Prep yourself before you wreck yourself.
Prep yourself before you wreck yourself.
Right. So the big launch, right, is going to start with FM Gamers, right? That's going to launch the new.
And we're the day after. The show is the day after that.
The day after.
Yeah. We have our final cast members for the FM Gamers. It's going to be myself. I'm going to be facilitating at least the first story that we play, which will be a game called Spelljammed, using a combination of, well, it'll be a D&D 5th edition game. It'll be a combination of like Spelljammer and Expedition to the Barrier Peaks and other sci-fi-ish elements, along with very fantasy elements. There's also the Bicons. They're coming fairly soon after that. I think that week they're also starting up. I think they're on Sunday, though, so that following Sunday.
Sweet.
And we'll be on Tuesdays.
Awesome.
And we're probably going to add a few more of the podcasts to the stream at some point, too.
Yeah, I think there's plans to kind of phase in some people along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And then we can use it for whatever, right? Like if I wanted to use it like for a night when I was doing design work or something.
Sure, I would. If I'm not in charge anymore, so I would talk to Rob about it first.
I'll talk to the bosses.
But like, it'd be good to have that stuff scheduled out so that it's consistent.
Yeah. I don't know yet. I don't know if I have a plan for stuff, but I've seen people do that where they just kind of stream their design work.
Mm-hmm.
Like I could mess with some of that. The other one I could do is I could always just do some Minecraft stuff.
I mean, yeah, there could be the Minecraft hour.
Yeah, exactly.
There could be the Encoded Designs design hour. That way, it wouldn't just have to be you. It could be any of us could show up and talk about games and things like that.
Yeah.
Just about the design process. There's a number of things that we could do.
Yep.
So yeah, those are ideas. But for sure, the FM Gamers are on the 30th. We're on the 1st. And then the Bicons will be that following Sunday, I believe. I'm not sure at what time, though. Somebody can let me know.
You know what we should do is schedule a periodic network AMA.
We could do that, too.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Yeah, just have a bunch of people from the network get on, every once in a while and just like ask us whatever you want.
Cool, Bob, you're in charge of that.
Put me in charge of something? That's a terrible idea.
It's your idea.
I'll run that by the boss.
I think it's a good idea.
You're not the boss of me.
I'm not the boss of you. Rob is. So is Senda.
That's what you got.
All right. The other thing I wanted to say, you folks out there in the chat room, please give us your topics that you'd like us to talk about in the after show.
Yes.
Bob will mark them down. We have a document. He'll put them down at the bottom of the after show. If there's anything that we are glossing over or we haven't really touched on or something that comes up that you want to hear us chat about or, talk to us about while we're talking in the after show, let Bob know and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, that's actually a good idea.
All right. That's our announcements. You have any more?
I don't know.
Go to the forum, sign up for that. That contest is still going on. We haven't gotten to 100 yet.
Check out our awesome Facebook page.
We'll get there later.
Sorry.
I mean, I'm never gonna give you a hard time about marketing. Go ahead and shill. It's fine.
Just saying.
All right, cool. Let us move on then to our featured segment, which is the garage, where we're going to talk about trappings.
Punch in the code.
The garage.
Access granted.
I got in.
First time.
I got in on the first try.
Yeah, in first try.
Doesn't usually happen. Is that how that goes?
I mean, sometimes you gotta just put the code in a couple times.
Is that how that works? Just punch it in.
Tap in a
repeatedly?
code.
All right.
I had a fork in the road.
tonight we're going to talk about trappings. These are the decorations that we hang on mechanics to make our gameable moments more story-like. So, Phil, what are trappings?
So, we are talking about the outward decoration or dress, something ornamental that we place on our mechanics to give them more narrative weight, context, and meaning.
I think it's important that part, narrative weight, context, and meaning. Because
otherwise they're just rules. Like, they're just arbitrary rules in the game.
Or if they're just a skin, then they don't have anything that can affect the game.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to talking about skins, and I know we're going slightly off script here, I was thinking about this earlier. Skins, you reskin a lot of board games, right? And you can reskin a lot of monsters and not do anything with the trappings, because then they're just skins. And we'll talk about skinning monsters later.
Yeah.
But trappings, even when you reskin a monster, trappings can have a narrative weight to it. And since these are stories, they actually matter a lot more, in my opinion, than just a skin.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're taking generic NPC stat block for, guard in Waterdeep, and then you use it again as guard in Baldur's Gate, right? Like, you've reskinned it, but you haven't actually changed any trappings to it, right?
Correct.
Like, all you've done is make, like...
It's a cosmetic change.
Yeah, yeah.
It is some amount of ornamentation, but it's not exactly what a trapping is.
Yeah, so what we're talking about
in role-playing games.
Right, so what we're talking about in trappings is that it's not just a look and feel, but that there is both a narrative and then sometimes an additional mechanical effect that is associated with the trappings.
I mean, even your Watergate guard to your Baldur's Gate guard, there is a level of trapping to that because they have different narrative weights. Because the Watergate guard is going to care about the Waterdeep, thank you. The Waterdeep guard is going to care about different things than the Baldur's Gate guard will care about. As far as like their city culture and things like that go, it's pretty thin, but it's there.
Thin.
Yeah,
it's thin. I was trying to make your argument for you about skinning versus trapping, because skinning is very, very cosmetic and not very narrative.
Let me put it this way: on the scale of heavy to light narrative weight, that is a very light narrative weight. Very light.
Yeah.
Trappings also give a mechanism a certain type of look and feel, and often different looks and feels depending on its trappings. And trappings can also, and probably should, support the genre and tone of the game.
They absolutely should. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about how they work, Ty?
Yeah.
Cool. So, you have a mechanic. It's often a character ability or skill that gives some mechanical boon or bane.
Sure. Then what you're going to do is you're going to give that mechanic or mechanism, right? A narrative dressing, some sort of ornamentation, something that gives it a look, a feel, as well as having that narrative intent of the mechanic, and then also having the mechanic have narrative weight.
Yeah,
as well.
I know that's a large mouthful that I wrote there.
No, it's okay. No, I mean, I see. I can do this so easily with one example. With one example, we're going to get to it in a second. Like, the best example of this is coming up.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about those words that we just said. There's narrative intent, narrative weight, and then fictional positioning is another thing that I want to talk about in a second. But like this ornamentation for the trapping that we're talking about, it gives it's a unique set of elements, which gives the mechanic a look and feel, and also has a secondary effect of providing the character with narrative positioning outside of the mechanic. Yeah,
and I think the thing that's important is that, and I don't know if we've given it enough, enough of a point this early on, is that we're saying trapping like it's one thing, but really what we're talking about is you take the same mechanism and with different trappings placed over it, you get slightly different narrative effects. You'll get some of the narrative effect will be the same, and then some of it's going to be different based on the trapping, right? So the mechanic part stays the same. The trapping adds the additional pieces to it that make it different. And oh my God,
maybe the best way to say it is that the impact on the fiction has a different fictional impact.
It does, even though mechanically kind of the same thing is going on.
It's funny because we're talking about all this stuff, but this is the thing that we do. We break things down, right? Like, we all do this stuff naturally at this point in our gaming lives.
I mean, where there's a possibility to do it, right? Because a lot of times a lot of games don't have us using trappings because they've kind of coded everything in
Yeah, there
itself.
are a lot of games that do that kind of stuff, aren't there?
Right, like D&D spells are coded for the most part.
Yeah.
Right, like, and that's okay because that's like trappings aren't always the thing you have to have.
There are some moments that are less coded these days.
Right, but I
Third
mean,
edition they were way more coded.
which one?
Third edition.
Oh fuck, everything was.
Second edition, I felt like they were way more flexible.
I think to some extent, yeah, that's probably true.
Because how they were worded and whatnot gave them a lot of wiggle room, so it was open to interpretation.
Yeah, but those aren't really trappings though. Those are the I mean, like when you're talking about spells.
My point is like somebody throws not a fireball. Well, actually, even when people threw a fireball, it was interpreted a bunch of different ways because the trapping of a fireball is it's an explosion that's fiery, so it can start stuff on fire.
Yeah.
But we don't. How many people actually start stuff on fire with a fireball in 3rd edition or 4th edition D&D?
Yeah, that's actually unless it was written into the rule package.
Correct.
That says like, all flammable materials catch on fire on a 4, 5, or 6 on a 6-sided die or something, right? Mm-hmm. Like
because in a lot of ways, narratively, it seems so silly that a fireball wouldn't set stuff on fire, but you could set something on fire with a torch.
Yeah.
So once again, a trap.
Although I think a lot of GMs allowed that. I think what you didn't do was like when you threw a fireball into a room, you didn't set the room on fire, right? But if a player was specifically saying like, "There's a whole bunch of gunpowder over there. I'm tossing my fireball to light the gunpowder on fire for an explosion," like that's a thing. Like as a GM, you could be like, "Cool, let's do that."
Yeah, but that at that point in time, like there's narrative dissonance in some way, shape, or form, right? Because why isn't the fireball starting stuff on fire? Like
Correct.
I've asked that question.
No, it's
so many times.
The reason it isn't is for simplicity. Right, because it's simple because otherwise the GM has to manage all this shit on fire, and now that's hard, right? And that's simply why Fireball doesn't actually catch everything on fire, because either it catches everything on fire, in which case the GM has a lot to work with, or it catches nothing on fire, or it catches a % of stuff on fire, and now you've added an additional mechanical complexity to Fireball and additional latency into the turn because you now have to roll to light things on fire.
Correct. Which you should just be like, make a ruling.
Right. And this is why, like, for instance, Fate Aspects work really nicely, because Fate Aspect, you could, like, throw a fireball for, you could throw a fireball and then somebody could put, like, the GM could just put down an aspect, like, on fire.
Yeah. In fact, aspects are one of the premier ideas of trappings in games.
Sure. We're going to get to that in a little bit.
Yeah. It all depends on how a group wants to get into those kind of arguments. I've seen groups that are super, like they want to bring some physics into it, and that fireball in the 10 by 10 room is going to splash out into the hallway and go X number of feet down the hallway. So standing outside the room isn't going to help you from avoiding,
right.
There's that whole ball of wax you're going to get into.
Right. I mean, like Jerry said, there was an article in 3E where they discussed the explosive part of the fireball extinguishes the fire, which is exactly what you say when you need to justify why you don't want to have those mechanics. But I think we can also just agree that that's hard, so we don't do it.
Correct. Although it makes a lot more sense at that point, because if you're going to utilize the fireball in that way, then you're like, oh, it's a concussive force. So you can also say that certain things get knocked back from it.
Right, but we also rulings. I mean, you can make those rulings, but people don't like to, right? They just throw the fireball, roll the dice for damage.
Sure.
Right, like that's what people want.
I
think otherwise it gets like super complicated. Which maybe somebody really loves, just not me.
Well, I don't want that stuff in a rules package. I just want to be able to be like, I'm just going to make a ruling. Because there are actually some spells now that, like Firebolt, it starts stuff on fire. It says it does.
Yeah, that's okay.
Unless it's on the person. I don't know. Like, once again, right? All right, let's.
Yeah, see, Shadowall got this, right? Rumors are that Gary used to go through inventories when Fireball was cast and had players roll for each item, saving throws for each item. Which, as you could tell, would be boring as fuck. So it would be boring as fuck, and that's not fun. Cool. So, all right. So this ornamentation, right? It's a unique set of elements which give the mechanic a look and feel, and also a secondary effect of providing the character with narrative positioning outside of the mechanic. And really, we get into the three things that Chris was talking about earlier, right? Narrative intent, which is what you want the mechanic to help simulate in the fiction of a game. Narrative weight, right? A set of elements that gives character fictional positioning. And then, of course, fictional positioning, the ability to use elements from the story to create an effect that will influence the game.
Correct. I think those are 3 solid definitions, right?
Yeah. I mean, they kind of chain together, right? Intent, weight, and positioning.
Uh-huh.
So we should talk about games that actually use some trappings so that we can, so we have some good examples.
I agree.
So give me, so you're going to do the one that's my personal favorite.
So Savage Worlds?
And I have not seen Suede, so I'm talking about the previous edition of Savage Worlds.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either. So Savage Worlds, in the powers, this is most specifically for the powers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
You take a generic power, and then you can put a trapping on it, and then if you want...
Not can. You're actually supposed to
put a trapping on it. And that trapping will have... That's where this narrative intent, the weight, and the positioning comes from.
Right.
So if your bolt power is a firebolt, that's different from your bolt power being a frostbolt.
So, right, and correct. And so in the rules for Savage Worlds, there is a mechanical package for bolt.
Yes.
Right? You spend this many power points, it has this range.
It does this damage.
It does this damage, and on a raise, it does this damage. Okay. And then, in the trapping section, there's a list of what narratively the trapping fire does.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a list of what the trapping frost does, and electricity and water or whatever. And you can take that same bolt, you can put any one of the other trappings on it. You still cast it mechanically like bolt.
Mm-hmm.
You describe it narratively based on the trapping, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is a ball of fire being hurled, a bolt of fire being hurled forward. It is a spout of water being shot out of my hand. It is a bolt of electricity. And then the additional mechanics that are tied to that trapping, as well as the additional narrative positioning of it, does things like I can't light that line of gunpowder I can't light that line of gunpowder up with my water bolt. But I can with my fire or electrical bolt.
Because you have a different set of fictional positioning.
Correct.
Which is all about making calls in the fiction.
Right. And so this is where Savage Worlds, a game that's essentially a generic rule system, this is where Savage Worlds gains a lot of flexibility, is that they didn't go and write firebolt, electrical bolt, water bolt, whatever.
Yeah, why would they? Because they...
Well, why? Don't say why would they. D&D has a fireball. Don't they have a firebolt too now? Don't they have a baby fireball?
I mean, they have a firebolt that's a single target thing.
Yeah, and then lightning bolt, right? Mm-hmm. Like those are. I mean, there are 2 separate sets of rules for those.
They're different. They have different effects, but yeah.
Yeah. So, but Savage Worlds uses trappings to multiply the bolt package, right? And I'm saying bolt, but we could talk about shield, we can talk about blast, we can talk about any one of those other ones. It multiplies that one rules package by each one of the trappings. Mm-hmm. And it actually allows you that if a trapping doesn't exist, it creates a mechanical framework to create a trapping. So maybe I want mine to be, I don't know, I want mine to be like slime, yeah, or digital. Like I'm a cyber guy and I shoot like digital constructs out of my hands or something. What does that mean? Well, if it hits electronics, like it screws up electronics.
Yeah,
right?
That's totally legitimate.
Right, and what does it look like? Well, it looks like, all these like broken character symbols, multicolor things shooting out of my hands. Still does damage like a bolt, but if it hits my iPad, it turns my iPad into gibberish.
Which would be terrible if you need to use the iPad for something else.
Like following the rest of the show notes. But anyway, so for me, trappings, like the easiest way to describe trappings is how Savage Worlds deals with them. And I think Savage Worlds does a superb job of using it, as well as gaining a ton of economy. Because they have a relatively simple power list. Mm-hmm. But they can be superpowers, they can be magical, they can be weird science, mm-hmm. like all of those things. So they wind up getting a lot of mileage out of a small amount of rule package.
Nice.
Cool. You want to talk a little bit about the next one since I talked so much about Savage Worlds?
I mean, because
just go ahead.
While Savage Worlds is probably the easiest one for people to understand, based on how it's set up, Fate is probably the most complicated one to understand for how to set it up. So, like, skills and stunts are considered two types of trappings in Fate.
Yep.
Yeah, and this is straight from an article by Lenny Balsera.
So it's true.
Yeah, what a trapping does is it gives you access to one of the basic Fate game moves under a certain narrative context. That's how those things actually work in that particular game. So, like, skills are just a basic set of things. Like, if you have drive, that means you can drive a whole bunch of different stuff.
Yep.
It means that. And the stunts, when you create these things, you're creating these trappings wholly. You are either giving yourself some sort of rules exception in a fictional context, or some sort of bonus in a fictional context. Using a specific action, which those are generally fictional contexts too.
Yeah, because the truth is, stunts only have like 4. I say 4. I could be wrong.
I think it's 3.
Yeah, there's only there's a finite number of things that stunts actually do.
Yeah, it's either
give a +2 to one thing.
To one thing in a specific situation.
Right.
To one skill in a specific situation.
Yep.
It lets you use it. The wiggle room is that you can get a +1 to 2 different skills.
Yes. That's the less specific.
It's the same idea though.
Yes.
It lets you use a different skill in place of a skill in a specific narrative situation.
Yep.
Or it lets you break the rules in some way.
Exactly. So then what happens is those get basically, you put trappings over them, right? And that's how you create varied and different stunts, and then that's how you create them specific for a game. Like, we did this when we wrote Part-Time Gods of Fate.
Yes, we did.
Like, we took Part-Time Gods from Alloy, we took basically the trappings off of it, right, and stuck them onto Fate. So that things that we, like, when we needed a stunt to do a certain thing, we just put the trapping on top of it, and it gives a +2 to using puppetry when doing, like using puppetry when looking at someone, in the eyes, or to, whatever effect.
The other thing that Fate does is aspects, especially on character sheets.
Sure.
Because anytime you have a character aspect, what it does is it gives you a specific set of I'm good at these things, without having any, like, you just know how to do those things. It gives you some narrative positioning.
Well, let me flip it. Can I flip it over real quick?
Sure.
Aspects are, again, a finite mechanical package. An aspect has a finite number of mechanical things you can do with it, right? You can re-roll dice. You can gain a +2.
Yes.
You can.
But that's not even the mechanical package for it. That's when you invoke a fate point on it.
Yeah, but you need them to do. Like, you need the aspect to do it. You can't just spend fate points to do that.
But the aspect itself, just by itself, has narrative positioning.
No, that's what I'm saying. But I'm saying, like, you take aspect, right, and then what you call, like, the words you put over the aspect change the narrative positioning in which it can be used.
Correct.
Yeah, it's still the same. Like, when I spend a fate point on diligent worker and badass driver, mechanically they do the same thing. Fictionally,
they're two very different things.
Right, and that's, I think, our point about trappings is that the underpinning mechanic is relatively constant, but the way they get used in the narrative differs because of the trappings that surround it. Yeah, and so that's where aspect gets. That's where aspects get interesting, right?
Well, that's why they're interesting.
Yeah, because otherwise you just have fate points. Like, you could. All right, so imagine this, right? This is not fun, but imagine Fate where the game's not based on aspects. It's based on a pile of fate points you have, and when you have to make a skill roll, you can just spend a fate point to get a +2, a reroll, or whatever.
Boring.
Right? I have a bunch of skills. I have a couple of stunts, and I have fate points.
Yeah.
I have no aspects. That's not what makes Fate Fate.
No, it's not. Although you're straying really close to Forge of the Dark games at that point.
Right, but what makes Fate Fate is it's this wonderful marrying, and we did a whole episode on this way back in the vault. We did a whole episode on talking about how the narrative and the mechanical part of an aspect are the same thing, or not the same thing. They're always together.
Yeah.
Right. And now what we're saying is that we're talking about how the narrative part is its trapping.
Yeah. And is a mechanism in and of itself.
I'm gonna need another coffee.
Yeah. Maybe we can get you another coffee. I'll have to walk away though to go make that coffee.
It's fine. I'm gonna power through.
You're gonna power through? Are you falling asleep over there?
No, at some point
me.
this
I'm falling
at some point this other time zone's gonna catch up to me. Anyway, super interesting.
It is super interesting.
Can I do another one?
I mean, you should do Cyberpunk 2020.
Right.
You should probably do Masks.
I say Cyberpunk 2020 to be safe. I'm going to say for sure Cyberpunk 2013, and it may not have made it into 2020. But in Cyberpunk 2013, which was the original box set, the Matrix, when you were a netrunner, you would pick the interface by how you saw the rest of the Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
So there was like one that was like techno future, where things are color orbs and chrome samurai and stuff like that. There was a noir one, which everything was like a noir detective movie.
Okay.
And like your programs came out like your killer program was like a big kneecap breaker. And then there was a fantasy one. And so it was up to you which one you wanted to run on your deck. And then what it did was in the rules for each of the programs, it would tell you under each one of those filters what the programs would look like. And then the GM would basically describe the Matrix to you like it was a fantasy, like it was a noir detective thing, or in this techno future thing.
Mm-hmm.
I threw that shit out and just went with the techno future one because I just wanted my Gibson Cyberpunk. But it was originally in 2013. I'm not sure if it made it into 2020. 2020 might have just jettisoned that shit.
It's interesting because what does that do for the game?
So it takes the exact same, in this case it had less fictional positioning.
So the fictional positioning was light.
It was very light, but it changed the narrative descriptions. So the killer program was still the killer program,
mm-hmm.
just that it looked like a knight in the fantasy one and a knee breaker in the noir one. And I forget. I honestly think it looked like some sort of samurai thing in the other one.
So it is legitimately just a skin.
Probably more skin.
Which with our definitions that
probably
we've been utilizing,
probably falls a little short since we didn't really break out skin early when I was writing this. But yeah, it probably falls more towards skin and less towards trapping. Just because there isn't really a.
So it is it's the similar as our earlier example of the Waterdeep guard.
Yeah, it's a little more like that. But I'll redeem myself with one more.
Okay, tell me about masks. I don't think you need to redeem yourself. I think it's good to
No, it's cool.
That's a good example to have to show that version of it.
There's definitely a skin. Masks gives you a set of powers, right? But the player kind of has to describe like what their character is for those powers to start taking on meaning. Like I know when we played Masks, all of my powers were solar based.
Yep.
And so we described them all in terms of heat and light.
And that mattered.
It did matter because when I flew, I lit up.
Mm-hmm.
So hiding was not a thing I could do while flying.
Yeah.
Because that was narratively important. And it had also had fictional positioning because I think when I used my powers, I could make everything light up.
Well, it had narrative weight.
Yeah. So yeah.
I mean, fictional positioning is the idea that you can use a thing to do a thing. Fictional narrative weight is how much it actually means in the story and the mechanics of the game.
So yeah. So in Masks, like you wind up with, and because in Masks powers aren't mechanized, there are moves to use your powers,
mm-hmm.
but the moves are the moves to use your powers are mechanized. Your powers are not.
Yeah, I mean this is the first PBTA game that we touched on, and I'm glad it's at the end because a lot of PBTA games are all based on this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like your characters are fairly thin in a lot of ways. Like there's not a lot to them in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
So the narrative weight that they have and the fictional positioning that they can utilize is really where the moves get triggered from and how they interact with the fiction.
Right.
And how the game master, after the roll has been made, can interpret the 7 and 9 results a lot of times. Like, what is the consequence? Well, it's going to be based on the stuff that kind of happened leading up to it.
Which also, the 6 is also influenced by that as well.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the 10 is the only time where it's like, I said a thing, I do a thing. Everything else is, I said a thing, yes, and something else is going to happen based on what you said.
And then you have all these elements that you can draw from because of their narrative weight and their narrative intent to do it, because you were solar based. Your intent was to have a character that was solar based.
Yep. And that all my powers had something to do with light.
So,
Yep.
like, that could blind somebody else that's in the area that you didn't
Yeah,
intend to blind, things like that.
And the cool part was, for masks, because you're not mechanizing the powers, when I say something like that, and it's like, narratively, yes, that totally works. No, it's not anything you've ever done before. Cool, let's unleash your powers. Right? As opposed to, unleash your powers because you want to blind him, as opposed to, I want to punch a laser hole through his chest, which would be directly engage a threat.
Yep. Engage an enemy, engage a threat. I always forget what the name of that move is.
Yeah, it's
been a long
engage
time.
a threat or something. Yeah.
But it brings up a point, design wise and play wise, like those games, that genre of game, the Power by the Apocalypse game, they rely on this stuff way more than a lot of the other games.
They definitely rely on the narrative part way more. And that's, so arguably, I think this is where it gets dicey, because you can't, the moves of the game are as customized to the game as much as any other part of the game. Like, you can't take Apocalypse World and make masks out of it. Like, that's what when people think like that's what designing a PBTA game is, that's what you first think.
The moves aren't the trappings. The moves are just the moves.
No, that's what I'm saying though. Like, so because what we've been saying about trappings is that the mechanics remain relatively constant, and the trapping placed over them changes them somewhat.
Or a lot.
Right, or a lot. But in a PBTA game, that's not necessarily, like, inside a given PBTA game, that's very true. Across PBTA games, that's not true, because PBTA is not a generic system.
It's not.
It's not. It is a framework by which to create a game, not a generic system of role-play.
I think in pretty much every PBTA game I've ever played, though, the playbook is almost like a set of trappings.
Yeah, because they all essentially interact with the game, but differently. Yeah, I definitely think that's true, because we have a base set of we have a base set of moves everybody's going to use.
Yep.
Each playbook contributes a few additional moves, but then they also help you narratively describe, like, give your character narrative positioning weight.
Yeah.
And all that. Yeah. I will say that's PBTA designer rookie one mistake is if you think PBTA is a generic system. It is not a generic system.
It's not a generic system. It's a design philosophy.
Correct. Yeah. Because when you first go to make a PBTA game, you'll be like, wow, this is way harder than I thought it was going to be.
It's almost to the point, I think, that there is a number of constants that equal a Power by the Apocalypse game. Like,
I think you got to have some, like, you put certain things in them.
It's why Forged in the Dark games are not Power by the Apocalypse games, even though you can see some of the similar DNA.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, you can definitely see where they came from. I mean, without a doubt that what's his face wrote Voodoo before he wrote Blades.
Yep. Harper
wrote Voodoo before he wrote Blades. Like, you can see some Powered by the Apocalypse DNA in there.
So is there a way we can sum all the stuff up that we've just said?
Well, we should kind of, like, let's put it together, break it down, and we'll head into our break.
So you have a mechanic or a mechanism for your game. You have the next line.
Sorry, I was just getting ready to answer Jason, but I want Jason's thing for the for the break. You give it some elements, which make it more focused and lend fictional weight to it, which is what we've been saying all along.
Yep. And those elements, they have the side effect of giving the character or whatever they're associated with in the game some amount of fictional positioning when using them. That seems to be what a trapping is, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So now that we've talked about how trappings work, we're going to check in with the chat room because I want to really answer Jason's question. And see if we're checking with the chat room, see if they have anything else to say. Chris is going to tell us first about another show on the Misdirected Mark Network.
So there's these two wonderful hosts on a show Ray and Monica. They're old friends. They explore gameplay and design through the lens of diversity. They share also some of the dumbest humor that gaming has to offer, and I can attest to that. Their show is lovely. It's called Bonus Experience.
Mm-hmm.
You should really go listen to it. It's quite wonderful.
Yeah, and none of it would be possible without Margaret.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Margaret's wonderful.
Margaret's
So
the
wonderful.
unsung hero in all of that.
And her onion and peanut butter sandwiches are awful. I ate one
Ugh,
because I had to
did
pretend.
not.
I had to pretend to be Margaret once
Oh,
and edit a couple episodes. It was bad.
No.
Does not taste good.
no, it's bad. All right, cool. I want to grab Jason's thing.
Yeah.
Jason was saying, I think PBTA is closer to a programming language in some way. I'm not sure if I would call it a programming language as much, because programming languages have specific syntax, as much as I would consider it like the concept of programming, right? Like things like for loops, right? Like all programming languages have loops, but how you write a loop in each language is slightly different. Although once you are versed in one programming language, you can almost always see like, oh, that's a loop, right? Like they're different, and to me that's more how PBTA feels. It's like you learn to program, like you learned Apocalypse World, so then you understand how masks works, but they're completely different languages with similar constructs inside of them. There are four, there's this loop, there's this, and then when you go to make your own, you're solving those problems. Like I need a for loop, right? Like I need to write my for loop in this game.
It's interesting. Because I think all of game design is about making those loops.
Well, to some extent, yes. But I would say that PBTA forms, I think what you said, which is a design philosophy, right? It is a programming style, is probably you can program it in different languages, but you're programming in this general style.
Jason followed that up with moves are syntax. Looking at the generic move templates from Brandon points it out in some way.
Yeah, I'm not a look, I'm not a programmer. I never really have been, so I can't, it's hard for me to contribute to this conversation. I don't understand the secondary language of example that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely feel like that, right? So the GM is the compiler of, I think, all games, right? If all games are code, the GM is the compiler that actually puts the code together to run.
Yeah,
I know we're way off.
I'm
the
also
playground.
not sure that computer programming language is an example for how role-playing games function is the right way to talk about design.
I don't know if that's true or not. I say that because computer programming is a set of mechanisms in order to produce a certain effect.
Yeah, it's funny because I say that, but I did take programming in college. Like I've taken C, I've taken hexadecimal, I've taken some of the basic programming languages, COBOL, things like that when I was young. So I mean, like I understand some of the stuff, but
yeah, I think you can definitely draw some parallels.
There's as much parallels to programming as there are to movies. They're by no means perfect, right? Role-playing games are not a perfect analog of movies or books or any other media. They're not a perfect analog to programming. Are there some similarities? There are definitely some similarities.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the idea of like the difference between hexadecimal and then C+, and then C, and then like JavaScript, and how does a 5th edition language compared to a Powered by the Apocalypse language compared to a Forged in the Dark language, are they really all that? Is there similarities to like draw from in those things?
Sure, because all of them solve the same basic functions. I need to do a thing. I need to fight a thing, right? Like they all solve those same basic functions. How they choose to solve them and the syntax by which they use to do it are different.
Well, so if moves are syntax, then the D20 roll and the D20 roll and the 3 different D20 rolls that exist in D&D plus the slot system or whatever the resource system is for a particular character and the hit point attrition is the syntax for 5th edition.
Mm-hmm.
That rule set, because there's more than one there's more than just D&D now that exists in it.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, some have overlapping features, right? And we see this is true in languages as well, right? Like hit points is a mechanism that is in both Dungeon World and D&D. Both have the same function. They're an attrition system to determine when your character runs out of, narrative importance, right? Dies.
Yeah.
But how how they are damaged.
It's funny because you say narrative importance when they die. When a lot of times when a character dies, they have more narrative importance. It's the strange thing, right?
No, they no longer command the narrative of the game. Other people acting on their behalf or the effects of them leaving the game has narrative impact, but a character when they die no longer can directly affect the story as the character.
True.
Other people can affect the story on behalf of the character. That's character death, right? Character death is your character no longer directly affects this narrative by their own actions. That's death. But yeah, absolutely, the ripples of a character dying has profound narrative changes on a game. And you can also have character who are like other players who are like, we're doing this for Jonesy, right? We're gonna burn this villain to the ground for what he did to Jonesy. That has narrative impact, but it's no longer Jonesy who's doing anything in the game. In fact, that character loses their agency.
Yeah, and in fact, somebody just mentioned agency. Yeah, that might be better than narrative importance.
Yeah, agency.
They no longer have agency in the story.
Correct. Yep.
Agency in the narrative.
Okay.
But yeah, that interesting idea that like hit points are basically the same thing in those two different games. And in hell, hit points is like, I mean, it's been carried over to so many games that it's so generic that we can do, can't think if we already have, we could do a garage on hit points. I'm pretty sure we did this already, where we can talk about.
I don't actually know if we ever did a garage on hit points. I don't know if we've ever done an episode on hit points.
Well, let's find out.
I feel like we did, but if we didn't, hit points would be a great one because they're fairly generic, and
Excuse me.
hit points are determined, lost, recovered, increased, and decreased. But how you do them completely depends on the game that they're inserted into. And we could just roam across like so many different games.
Yeah.
Because you can change so many games change the name on it, right? They
They
skin
do.
it, right? So suddenly it's vitality or life points or like.
It's just I don't have the language or the study in my head right now to talk about the idea of games as a programming language. Because I mean, the parallels of it, like, sure, I suppose you can almost parallel anything to anything at any point in time. It's the same. It falls under the same arguments that I've been making against stopping comparing role-playing games to movies and TV shows.
That was my point earlier.
Yeah. I mean, I know that's what you said earlier.
It works as a decent enough analogy.
I don't know if it's well, yeah, like,
But
I don't think they're good analogies anymore.
Yeah,
That's why we've been constantly for 200 episodes trying to come up with new language.
Right.
For someone new, it's a super quick shortcut to get them in the right direction, but it's not. It's by no means a perfect analogy.
Sure, I guess if they're familiar with computer programming language.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking more along the movies and the books. But
Well, yeah.
I think that's where you were going. Yeah. Anyway,
All right.
that was a cool side diversion.
Yeah,
were there
we
any
should
other?
jump back in.
Were there any other questions?
Yeah, actually. Avi the Jackal said, Trappings is when you use goblin rules for your evil wizard's helper Gollum, but add in fictional positioning and construct rules, no?
Say that again.
Trappings is when you use goblin rules for your evil wizard's helper Gollum, but you add in the fictional positioning and construct rules. Is that where we're...
If my Gollum, if we're talking about Gollum from Lord of the Rings, and we're just gonna use the Goblin stat block for Gollum, I don't know, like, are we talking about we just have an NPC then? I mean, why are we using the construct rules
The ring.
for the
I don't
ring?
know.
Yeah, like, I don't understand why we're using the construct rules for Gollum.
Because you might have meant Gollum, not Gollum.
You mean for a golem?
Golem.
Oh, for a golem. So we're just gonna.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes, that's different. And yeah, so it's combining a few things. It's taking the goblin stat block.
Mhm.
It's sticking on
You're putting
the
it-
trappings of construct.
You're just putting the they have words for it for those games.
Yeah, but like, so the trappings of construct are, what is it? can't be put to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
I forget what the other ones are, right?
Whatever the list is. There's like a giant list
can't
of
be poisoned, can't be put to sleep, that kind of thing. And then throwing a skin on top of it.
I think we're missing the point.
Well, that's okay. Then we should back up and then if we've missed it.
I think that question is missing the point of trappings. Okay. Like trappings are like, if you say, sure, like instead of using a rules package for that, you can use a rules package for that. Are you really throwing a bunch of, I suppose you're throwing a bunch of trappings on it. Except like you're not just using the trapping part of it, which is like, here's the fictional intent that it has. You're putting, which also has rules. You're actually just using the rules package, so it's not necessarily a trapping. It's actually just a set of mechanics.
Can I extrapolate a little?
Sure.
All right. So let's say we make this golem, right? My wizard's golem, and in the story, I have the golem put its arm through a glass case, and it doesn't wince, and like it just puts its arm through a glass case, pulls it out so the wizard can grab something. I'm
with you. So like the difference between what was described and what you're talking about are two different things.
Well, that's what I'm trying to take what the original piece was and extrapolate it a little further, which is the trappings part of that is construct narratively isn't going to feel pain for putting its arm through a glass plate.
Now, I can put the mechanical construct package on top of that.
Yeah.
But then I am more bound to the rules of that thing.
Right.
So it probably doesn't have as much. It still has fictional weight, but the fictional weight is more focused because of a rules package that you have assigned to it.
Right, and so the thing that we mentioned before with Savage Worlds was that trappings had both narrative and at times mechanical properties to them. So
yes, they do have mechanical properties to them. Like they can have both. The idea to me the idea of the trapping truly is the fact that it gives it shifts the mechanical impact to also have some sort of narrative intent and weight.
Right.
Yeah, I'll be clarified the question. It's more than color. It's rules and fictional positioning.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is.
That's
because fictional positioning is a rule. People don't realize that. Fictional positioning is actually a mechanic in play. Like, otherwise it wouldn't actually function.
Ding.
You were wondering what we were going to talk about next week?
Apparently we're talking about that.
We're going to go look and make sure we haven't done it before.
I feel like we have.
feel like we've done this before, but 100 episode rule.
Yeah, it's true.
If we haven't done it in 100 episodes, it's like a new episode.
Like you can do both of those things. Like you can put the you can be like, okay, this is a construct, right? And we're gonna use the goblin stat block to have my little goblin construct, and that's fine. But like, if there's nothing, if you punch through a window and there's rules in that mechanical package for punching through a window, then it's less of a trapping.
Correct.
But it's still a construct, which is a trapping all of itself, assuming that your game allows for that. Or says it allows for that. And I'm not talking about how we're going to game master it. I'm talking about what the rules actually say.
Yep, because
I'll just game master around it.
Because some games will mechanize more parts of that than leave it to narrative. Right? Some games would just be like, it's a construct. Good luck.
Yeah, here's the rules for constructs.
Right. And maybe there's not. Maybe it's just, it's a construct. It's not a living being, blah, blah, blah. And then during play, somebody's like, I'm going to put it to sleep. And you're like, well, you can't because it's not a living being. Like, it doesn't have to say that in a narrative heavy game, in a game with not a lot of mechanics, you can simply state something like a construct has a construct is not a living being. It is, mechanical. It is magically animated material, whatever. It doesn't sleep. It doesn't whatever. And then when somebody's like, I poison it, you could be like, narratively, well, you can't.
Correct.
Right.
But if it's a wooden construct,
you could set it on fire.
Yeah.
Yes.
But if it's a metal construct,
you cannot.
Unless it's really, really hot.
Correct. But if it's a metal construct and it's carrying your wizard and you throw a lightning bolt at it.
Oh, that's a problem.
Right.
See, and that's the difference between a trapping, in my opinion, and a mechanical rules package that is like construct, this is what it is.
Right. But some games address the idea of trappings by stacking that with rule packages.
And you can do both. I'm fine with that.
You can do both. You can do one. You can do the other. Right.
The more, if you're going to play a game as written by the rules, punching through that glass, we have to go look at the construct package to see if there's anything that says anything about getting cut.
Right. And if not, it takes like a D3
getting
damage
slashed.
Or something.
Right.
Right.
And if it doesn't, then I can just be like, well, it took no damage then.
Right.
I can just say that. But if it has it there, then I should obey the game. If we're going to use the computer programming thing, the input was that. The output should be whatever the rules say.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, hence why I'm a fan of games that actually open themselves up more for that and less for games that pin that down.
Yeah, me too. I mean, and technically they're all it's a trapping too because it's construct. It just depends on how rigid your rules are.
Yeah.
Here's my classic example of third edition and why it really didn't do the trappings thing at all. There's an adventure called The Heart of Nightfang Spire. The idea was that you can't use any of your ridiculous spells to get inside of the spire. You have to go traverse the spire. But in order to do that, instead of just saying it's impenetrable via magic, there's a page of all the things it's immune to.
Right.
A page. 3/4 of a page of 10-point font of all the things that you can't cast to get inside of this thing.
Which totally will fail because in the age of splat books, somebody's going to find a spell that's not on that list.
Sure.
And then what?
Yeah.
Right?
Whereas simply if you just say this thing is impenetrable to all magic.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's all I'm saying. There's a scale for that trappings mechanics thing.
There is.
I actually like when you bring up the computer programming example. It makes sense because roleplay games are about what is the input, what is the output.
Mm-hmm.
Now, once you put it through the machine, like the game masters or facilitators compiler as a compiler will have less to compile if the rules are more stringent. They will have more to compile if the rules are less stringent. So that's a good. If you want to use that analogy, that's a good way to think about it.
I mean, if we want to get overly nerdy on this example, the more rules there are, the more RAM you need to allocate to be able to hold the rule set.
Absolutely.
As opposed to a lighter mechanical game, which requires less RAM to actually hold in memory.
And I'm really into games that somewhere straight towards the middle of like too much and too little.
Mm-hmm. I stray towards light. I'm like middle light. I can play completely light, but that's like Senda's territory.
My two favorite games going right now are D&D and anything Forged in the Dark. They're not exactly...
You're D&D middle-ish. Forged in the Dark, a little to the complex side of what you call it, of middle.
I think they're both in the same space.
They're pretty close.
Yeah. So let's get back to some questions. Seems like a good idea. This is a fascinating discussion.
Yeah,
I'm very much enjoying this. It's not as easy to pin down as I thought. Well, I mean, it's not hard to pin down. It's just the idea of where does it actually land.
It's because it borders really close to skinning.
Mm-hmm. Skinning can be a kind of trapping.
Yeah, but Avi did actually a really good job in the chat of saying, like, if you can skin your fireball to sound like screaming demons that's being thrown at the target, but it doesn't actually do anything.
That's true.
Right? Like that's cool.
That's just a skin. It's not a trap.
Yeah, it's cool. It makes your wizard totally badass because you're throwing like a screaming hellball, but it doesn't actually change anything about the fireball.
Correct.
Yeah. That's skin. Trapping would be much more if the screaming demons had some sort of effect on, like, you know, all of a sudden the GM's like, cool, everybody should make a saving throw versus fear, right? Like that's a trapping.
That is a trapping. Yeah, that's a really good example of it.
Screaming Hellball, best opening act for the Ditch Lilies. Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about trappings. What kind of play experience do they create for us in a game?
Roll with it.
They can help characters feel very different, even though they're built in the same kind of way. They also provide us with springboards for how we tell our stories because they focus our creative minds by limiting our options. I think that trappings do that pretty well. Like, well, I have a bolt. Instead of coming up with what the bolt is every time, I know that I'm throwing cold bolts all the time. So that changes how I might like approach it. Like, also gives me the idea, like, I'm gonna throw a cold bolt at the ground to like create some frost. You know, gives us those kinds of options. They have a narrative weight, which makes them usable in play to affect the game world based on how much their fictional positioning relates to a given situation. That's aspects in a nutshell.
Yep.
Also stunts, because if you're in a specific situation, a stunt will affect things way more than in not in that position. And they can help support the genre by making mechanisms that conform to the established genre conventions.
Yep.
I would have got there in a second.
Yeah, autocorrect fixed that while I was in the airport.
That happens.
So cool. Let's do a few questions before we wrap this topic. So, like, what are some of your best tips for leveraging trappings in your game?
And what about you? You want to go first?
Yeah, I'm going to now ditch this answer since we've evolved this discussion. I would say that the most important thing is that pay attention to what the trapping is and think through narratively what it means.
Yes.
Right? You don't want to overdo it. Like, you don't want to do the thing in D&D where you're literally rolling saving throws for every item in somebody's backpack. But you do want to, in a PBTA game on a 7 to 9, you do want to be cognizant of those trappings at the point you're describing what happens next. Like, the GM will offer you a worse situation, outcome, whatever. Like, trapping has everything to do with what that should be.
Is it forceful and messy a trapping?
Well, they're technically tags.
They are.
Yeah, I guess in a way they are trappings because you can place them on an object. Forceful and messy basically have a conferred narrative positioning. They don't actually have mechanics underneath them, but messy basically means like there's no hope you'll hide what you've done here. And forceful, you'll knock things over, break things, that kind of, yeah. So all of those I think are really important in understanding what your next move as a GM is. Like, you got to soak those things in, which requires you to be a little more cognizant of, you have to be a little more about tell me what you do and less about roll those dice. Right? Because that's a thing that PBTA tries to enforce greatly. But like, we all know, like when we're playing, like when you're playing like Pathfinder in your like 11th round of combat, like you stop describing what you're doing and you're like, I roll, I hit 14 points of damage.
Yeah.
Right? Like you've dumped all the trappings from the...
You've dumped the narrative.
You've dumped the narrative, but in some ways it's okay because the game isn't actually asking, because on a fail, there's no narrative, like there's no push, like where the GM has to intervene.
It's true.
So it allows those things to drop. But you've done this. I've done this in PBTA games where people immediately pick up the dice and they're like picking a move off the list, and I'm like, oh, I'm like, put the dice down. Like, what are you doing? Like, tell me what you're doing. Cool. This is the move you want to use.
It's almost how I push, because of that in the Forge in the Dark games. I even push my D&D games when they're in the exploration phase. Like, don't tell me what skill you're using.
Yeah.
Do
tell me
something until you trigger one of your skills.
Yep, I'm not going to know which one you need to roll until you tell me what you're doing. In fact, I was just reading Things from the Flood, and they say the exact same thing in Things from the Flood. They're like, have the players describe what they're doing. The GM decides if it needs a roll. And then, as a group, you'll figure out which skill it is based on what they said they were doing.
I think it's a thing that needs to be in more games, like especially
so much more.
Like some of the bigger, more traditional type games, like that advice isn't there yet.
Yeah,
it'll be great when in the next editions that come out. Hopefully, it'll slide into there.
Yeah, I mean the one that's the most common for me, and it happens all the time, even with experienced players, especially in PBTA games, we'll be in a combat and somebody will be like, I'm going to jump in front of the bad guy, and and do whatever, and I'm like, okay, is your intent to protect the person behind you, or is your intent to punch the thing in the face?
Those are two different things.
Because we're going with two different moves based on like, what is it it's not even just the narration, you jumped in front. I need even one level higher. What is your intent?
Yeah. That matters a lot.
It matters a lot for it matters immensely for a PBTA game. And it has effects on other games as well, because it will actually it will drive you down a certain mechanical path. I imagine even D&D that has a mechanical effect, whether somebody's getting in somebody's way to provide cover for somebody to to defend versus attack, or do you just get both by the?
Can I get a soapbox for a second?
Would you like mine?
Yeah, can I have a soapbox?
Yeah, hang on here.
Thank you, appreciate that. Oh, cool! I got this soapbox.
Yeah, I was able to carry it onto the plane as my carry-on.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. It's good that you brought your soapbox with you.
I take it everywhere with me.
So, that thing that you're talking about before, when people get to like certain levels of like Pathfinder or whatever, they're just rolling, and I did so much damage.
Yeah.
A bunch of years ago, I actually got into an argument with somebody saying like, why are you doing that? Why aren't you describing what you're doing before you do it? In fact, you should play that way. And of course, I shouldn't have said that, because you can play whatever way you want. my soapbox thing is like, if you want to play that game, there are plenty of wonderful board games these days that do that.
Descent and all of those play like
more than that these days. There's a whole genre of board games that do that if you just want the competitive
monster
stomping whatever.
Absolutely.
How much damage can I possibly pile on?
I talk about them all the time. I play Stuffed Fables. Like I played we're getting a Dreamcrawler one that's coming out sometime soon. You can play your D&D game that way if you want. But I don't see why you get your jollies off that. I don't understand why you get your jollies off that by doing X amount of damage to the monsters if it's just like, oh cool, I rolled a bunch of dice. Like I guess I could.
Well, the jolly isn't doing X amount of damage to the monster. Sometimes it is. The jolly is to kill the monster and get to the stuff.
Sure, I guess, but
for some people it's I did more damage than you did.
Sometimes it's that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's that, but it's a role-playing game with a facilitator who's not necessarily trying to kill you because they're not running what is a fair and balanced game. They're not refereeing necessarily. Right. It's not like a DCC tournament module or anything like that.
So here's what I think happens, though. Right? I think it's easy early on in combat to stay very focused in the narrative. And then I think as combats drag on, like high-level Pathfinder does, that you just like lose the will to keep describing shit. Like you actually get mentally tired, right? You've played 15th level, like 3rd edition, right?
I have.
Like 45 minutes into this combat with 5 players, we are already too fucking long into this combat, right? Now, again, there is a group of people who enjoy this very much, and I don't want to wrong bad fun them.
Yeah.
But I think what happens is that it's easy in the beginning of combat to do that. It's hard to do that 45 minutes later because of the just sheer cognitive load of what's going on. Whereas like a game like PBTA, like combat wraps up fairly quickly. Like you don't belabor combat.
There's another thing that thing that you're talking about, those other kind of games, because you're right, the PBTA combat wraps up rather quickly.
Yeah, 4 rounds max.
Yeah, and if it's more than that, you should be doing things that shift the combat.
Yeah, you should be like punching through a floor into another location. Yeah.
That's a totally different episode, but like how to make combats interesting over the course of a long period of time. So we were playing 4th edition D&D, and we were like 12th, 13th level. And Drew Smith, secret open the show, he's playing a character, does like 130 damage in the first round. It did a quarter of the thing's hit points. It didn't do anything to it, right? No. And he's like, I just did 130 hit points. And it did nothing, narratively.
And that's what... So, one of my favorite things in 4th edition...
Because narratively, there's bloodied.
Right. Bloodied.
There's a mechanic that is a narrative. That
bloodied was awesome.
Yeah.
Like, the first time that happened to us in 4th edition, where we got something to half hit points, and Bob was like, oh, it activates a set of moves, and it does all this shit to you guys right now. We were like, what?
Neat, right?
And then we were like, fuck, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it is cool.
Like, there's a mechanical penalty... Like, there's a mechanical consequence for getting this thing to half its hit points.
And sometimes there was even a mechanical benefit.
Right.
Things got weaker.
Yep.
But that's one of those things, like, it doesn't matter how much damage you do because it didn't do anything.
Right.
Right? Like...
To tap into the chat room for a second, so narrative fatigue is, Rob saying, can we call it narrative fatigue? And I think part of what happens is, when you get into a long form, 45-hour-long combat, you also run out of ways to describe what you're doing.
It's true.
Right, so like in the beginning, you're like, I charge forth with my arm set, with my sword set back over my shoulder, and I take a big sweeping swing with it. 45 minutes later,
you don't want to say.
You're like, fuck it, I hit it.
Stab it.
Right, I just like you run out of cool shit to say, and so you just kind of like wear out. Which I think is what to me. I'm with you, right? Like, there's now a class of games that if you want to play the mechanics of fighting monsters, killing them and taking treasure, and aren't interested in narrative, which is totally fine, they're actually like you can just play D&D like that or other games like that. It's totally fine. But there are actually other games that will also make that like even more fun.
It is totally fine, but yes, I'm with you. Like there are other games I think that do that better if that is the experience that you're looking for.
Yeah, and there are definitely players who are enjoying the mechanical aspects of the game far more than the narrative aspects of the game. And so for them, it's not a big deal.
Actually, like I've played a lot of D&D in my life, right? I've gotten to the point where you get you understand it's all about pacing and flow at that point. Like we're
Drinking this fucking Phantom coffee.
Yeah,
There hasn't
I know,
been
right?
coffee in this like 45 minutes.
We've strayed into a whole other topic once again. This idea of like how to make combats and descriptions interesting. There's like a pacing thing to it. So like it's about like in the first few combats or moments that you have with characters, like you should be asking them what it looks like when they fight, so that everybody has a shared vision of what it looks like when they fight.
I'm going to now tap into something that Ange is saying. If we're looking at Pathfinder, right?
Mm-hmm.
There aren't mechanical benefits for better narration. So there's no mechanical incentive. Whereas like in 5th edition, if I narrate hard enough, I can possibly pick up advantage. And so there is a definite impetus for me, especially if a fight's going on long and we're getting desperate.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely an impetus for me to up my narration in hopes that I can grab an advantage somewhere.
That's true.
But in Pathfinder there wasn't.
There wasn't.
Like, so why, like, that's why it breaks down.
It was a pretty highly codified tactical skirmish game.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
But, and that's what happens, right? So like the narration's fun in the beginning,
4th
and then
edition was too.
Even more so. 4th edition, I'm fucking queuing up cards like a poker hand. Like, I'm gonna go do this one. The next turn, I'm gonna do this one. Like, I'm queuing them up.
It's funny that you say that it was even more so. I think they were actually equally. I think that Pathfinder just didn't do as good of a Pathfinder third edition didn't do as good of a job at presenting it.
I will say this. I think where 4th edition was different for me, because I play fighters almost exclusively. Fighters started having rule packages, and so suddenly application of correct package for situation was way more important than I run up and hit it with my sword.
It made the fighter more interesting because you weren't just
technically I was the warlord, which made it even more interesting because the shit I could do by picking the correct daily or whatever, those were hugely important.
Honestly, I think it was just more codified separate rules packages that didn't necessarily interact together compared to the 3.5 or Pathfinder fighter, which had a bunch of these feats that you would apply to your character, because they got tons of feats
but
that would modify.
But you didn't get all the effects.
Correct, you didn't get the effects, but you had a lot of fiddly bits.
You could get a lot of damage, and you could get a lot of bonuses to hit. But like when you could as a fighter stick someone in a position so they couldn't move. Like my warlord had a move that could hold, like it basically held the creature in place.
Yeah, you were this like a control, and then there were leaders, but it was controllerish type move.
Right, but that move like became like very important based on where it was in the initiative, what other people were doing. Like there was a lot of like.
It's a very different play style from.
It was very different, and it was exciting in the beginning. And then it felt more like we could have just played a tactical skirmish game. And I would have probably enjoyed it as a tactical skirmish.
That game overall would have been great if it played to level 10 and stopped.
Amen, brother.
Just saying. Everybody out there.
When the number of cards I had on the table were starting to edge out the other players at the table, we were starting to run into some problems.
Yeah, you played that game to level 10 and stop, and you had a great time. Like, we played it to like 14, and it was too much.
Right. And Schmitty's bringing up a good point. It made fighters as interesting as other classes, but it had a reverse thing. The guys in our group who played Wizards hated 4th edition because it made Wizards less special. Because suddenly we all could do cool shit like the Wizard, and the Wizards were like, "Fuck this game!" Like,
I think everybody missed the point. Is like every class should actually be special and cool.
Except that Wizards from 1st edition onward have never felt like that, right? In 1st edition, since we're way off topic here, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd edition, Wizards were it was a payoff. You sucked early on to be awesome later.
It's true.
Right?
Because it was quadratic wizard, linear fighter.
Right. And so much so that in AD&D, original AD&D, the experience table for Wizards was like almost twice as hard to gain levels as it was for fighter.
Well, yeah.
But so...
those are some weird leveling scales back in 1st and 2nd.
You ended up with a lot of parties that their entire goal was, let's keep the wizard alive long enough for him to level up and get the really cool stuff
very
to
different
make our
game.
lives easier.
Maybe we're so off topic.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the early days where, because my primary characters were fighters and barbarians, so my job was protect wizard. And in the beginning, the wizard like little buff. And then there's a point after like 10th level where the wizard's like, hey, step back for a second, watch this. boom, and then like everything fucking dies on the battlefield. And as a fighter, you're like, fuck, I'm not needed here anymore.
Yeah.
Pack up my sword. Cancel the game.
All right, couple more questions real quick, then we'll get out of here.
That's a nice diversion.
It's totally. I had a soapbox about the thing.
Can I have that back?
Yeah, you can. You're gonna give your soapbox back.
Thanks.
So, what kind of problems do trappings cause?
So I think if you don't exercise the narrative properties of it, you get that samey feeling. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, that's what happens in Savage Worlds. If you don't play up the trappings, every wizard has fucking bolt.
Yeah, I mean that's
right. Like what makes it interesting is that one of you is a fire wizard, one of you is the water wizard, right? Like, but if you're all just like, oh, I don't know, we're just wizard and I got like energy.
But is that really a failing of trappings?
It's not a failing of trappings. It's a failing.
it's a problem that they can cause because of misunderstanding.
Misunderstanding or underutilization.
Yeah.
Underutilization is probably. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with trappings. I think it's making sure that they are optimally used.
They can create narrative dissonance. Not narrative dissonance. They can create. If you're not all on the same page with them, then like understanding what a trapping is actually doing.
Sure.
Then you can have their shared vision can be blurred.
Yes.
And that can cause problems at the table.
Yeah.
Especially if the facilitator game master is not on the same page as the player. That has the trapping.
Does like when I say I shoot acid, does my acid dissolve glass?
Or does it dissolve steel?
Right. Like maybe everybody agrees it dissolves steel, but I'm like, cool, we can use it to we can use this acid to get out of to melt this window. And people are like, no, you can't. Like acid doesn't melt glass. Like
you've just created narrative dissonance.
Yeah. Yeah. And now you got to resolve that.
Yeah.
Which means that you're going to take some time at the table where the GM's going to have to make a ruling and be like, I think maybe it does. Or it doesn't. Whatever.
I think trappings could cause tons of problems with the understanding of how aspects work in Fate.
I think it's only a problem if you don't ask that question, right? Does everyone understand what this aspect does?
Mm-hmm.
Like if I write an aspect on the table, and I throw it down, and either I've not worded it clearly or I don't ask, does everybody understand what this means? Yes, you're absolutely right. Now people are starting to look at it and going off in different directions. Like on fire is an easy aspect.
Yeah.
But
but what does greatest swordsman in the world mean?
Right. Yeah, what is it? What does it mean? Right?
Yeah.
Like, can you beat him? Like, can you even fight the greatest swordsman in the world? Like,
probably not with a sword.
Right.
But when
it's
you shoot
Amber warfare.
Yeah, it's the Amber warfare problem.
You can't beat him with warfare because his warfare is always going to be higher than you.
Shift him to strength.
Yep.
Bob, do you have any thoughts about problems trappings cause?
I tried to think of something and I couldn't come up with anything.
It's okay.
Other than what you guys.
What kind of hacks or designs can be made using trappings?
Yeah, I mean, I think trappings are key to generic systems.
They are.
Like, if you're gonna have a generic system, if you're gonna have a generic system, you should have a system for your trappings.
You should at least explain how the system works. I mean, that's how you have the different set of trappings for Fate compared to Savage Worlds.
Right.
Like Fate lives on the idea of trappings in a lot of ways.
Right, and what core core has a set of generic skills and a set of generic stunts.
Mm-hmm.
But like that's not what they want you to really use.
No, they want you to build that stuff.
Right, they put it in there so that you could play the game as is, but you should really and they even tell you later, you should change the names of some of these skills if they don't make sense. Like drive isn't in core, it's ride. Right? So but if you're playing in a modern game, you kind of need to change that skill. You probably are going to change that skill to drive.
Also, if you're going to prioritize different vehicles, then maybe you might want to have different kinds of
or stunts. This stunt allows you to use drive for this vehicle, like shuttle pilot.
But we've just now talked about 2 or 3 different ways you can set the trappings in Fate to create a kind of game.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. I mean, we did that when we made Part-Time Gods of Fate. We replaced ride with drive, and we replaced lore with knowledge.
Yep.
And changed their meanings in the game a little bit, and then we built a whole bunch of stunts that kind of tapped into some of those.
Yeah. Which people still could have built their own stunts, but we just built a bunch
And
of
should.
solid examples.
And should build their own
a bunch of
stunts.
solid examples.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's it then, right?
I think we hit it.
Yeah. So, is there anything in the chat room? We good?
We have a couple more quick questions.
Sure.
Of you wanted to know when to GM so that a fireball is just damage, and when do you want the fireball to add fire complications to a scene?
Are we talking about D&D or are we talking about Dungeon World?
Yeah, I think that's one of those questions that's specific to games and tables and.
So, if you're going to have your fireball affect the world around it, aside from what the rules package says, that is a house rule that you should have talked to your players about in session 0, made them aware of it, or at least made them aware of it at some point, like, how about we try these things before you actually do it?
Right there. Correct.
If you want to implement it mid-game, you can do that as long as you are favoring the players first,
Tread
and
lightly.
second, and third.
Right. The other way I would do it in a game like 5e is if the player specifically asked for that effect. Like, hey, I want to cast Fireball, and I'm hoping it'll catch those tapestries on fire.
Yeah, and then there's some things you can do for that. Since they're asking to break a rule, essentially, you can be like, all right, well, let's do this.
Give me a point of inspiration.
Spend a point of inspiration.
Yep.
Spend a first level spell slot along with your first level spell slot.
Yes.
Use a resource.
For additional narrative.
Yep.
Right. So
Make an Arcana check while you're casting, and if you hit this DC, it'll go the way that you want it to. If you don't, then it will also have some sort of complication along with it.
yep. Yeah. It's perfect.
There's a number of ways that you can do it.
It's perfect. Yeah. So I think if you I think it's like you said. I think you go with what the game is, or you house rule it. You house rule it either initially or at some point. And then the other way is if a player asks for it, then utilize the currency in the game to be able to make that happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if I'm going to do that in Dungeon World, I probably would just like, I mean, if somebody was like, I'm going to throw this fireball and I'm expecting it to catch the curtains on fire, I'm probably just going to be like,
Yeah.
and then on a 6-, I might
Catch everything on fire.
right. I might just be like, yeah, you totally catch the curtains on fire, but it spreads way faster than you thought it would. Like,
Yep.
and run with it.
Yeah, that's a whole understand your game and how it functions, and then if you can manipulate it to make it work. Like, I'm a big fan of like you wanna mess with the rules. All right, let me mess with the rules back a little bit.
Yeah, like in Savage Worlds, I would be like, cool, you can do that. Just get a raise.
Yeah, right. Like that's perfect.
Like, just get a raise on this roll, because you have a mechanism. If you didn't feel like you rolled high enough, you have bennies, so you could spend bennies to try to get that raise.
Or you could just spend a Benny to be like, yeah, sure, spend a Benny, it'll do it.
Yeah.
Like there's any number of ways that you can just, if you understand rules.
Can you put this in as a topic? Because I think Chris and I could have real fun talking about this, which is designing rules within, just call it designing rules within a game. So it's these kind of edge cases where we're making rulings, but what we're utilizing is the pieces on the table to come up with a way to do it. And to be honest, it's the way that we designed Fate. It's actually what I'm doing right now with the Ditch Lilies game is I took your 1 rules and I'm kind of now looking at them going, okay, well, what are things I have and how can I make the thing I want with the pieces I have, or do I have to go make a new piece?
Oh, so you want to talk about designing a game using a pre-existing game.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because to some extent we do it as designers, but GMs actually need to like do this skill as rulings.
So are we talking about making rulings on the fly, or are we talking about designing a game?
Well, I think what we're talking about is making rulings using the mechanics of a game.
Okay.
Because
I'm all
because
about
there's making rulings that are just narrative or fiat, but then there's times where we say, cool, you can do that, but
you've asked to stretch a rule. Here's the house rule that we're going to come up with for this situation.
Here's the ruling. We didn't even say house rule because house rule makes it permanent.
True.
Here's the ruling. Now, any ruling can be promoted to a house rule, but here's the ruling we're going to use to solve this problem.
Fantastic.
And that actually, that's a fun topic.
It is a fun topic.
Oh, maybe we're on our way to next week.
We might be. Right.
And with that, since we're on our way to next week,
we should move on to the social or the conversation corner.
Yeah.
All right. So our topic for chatter this past week was about introductions. So I asked people what were some of their favorite introductions from role-playing games. We got a couple of responses. By the way, there's a new topic for chatter up in there.
I need to follow this topic so that I get in it each week.
Yeah, all you have to do is follow the Misdirected Mark. Us, because I put him in that. I put him in that. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, I should do that.
So GM Gerrymander said, for fantasy, I like how early Pathfinder adventure paths and modules had introductions set up. He still steals them from time to time. For instance, the party met on the road heading to the nearby religious festival. The party are all tied to one minor villain. Actually, that's a really good one. I remember that one. The heroes are all ex-criminals trying to do right. The party are in town looking for the same person. So that's like that's a campaign frame or an adventure frame. Mm-hmm. Like those are really good. I actually think those are pretty positive.
Can I tell you that I hate introductions?
Why?
I just want I want the whole party to know each other. Let's get playing.
Well, that's what I mean. Like that's how they know each other.
No, I mean I'm just like, cool. Tell me how you guys met. Awesome. Let's play. Like
I don't. I love that stuff.
I used to do this to like a great extent, but nowadays I'm like, awesome, cool. Let's do a round of narration or whatever. But like, tell me how you guys all became friends. Awesome, cool. Let's go.
It's funny because a lot of times the games that I am facilitating, the games I am running, that moment when we talk about how everybody kind of met and how they're all tied together and what the frame is, creates the campaign.
Well, I do that with leading questions, though. So with leading questions, I'll be like, cool, who did you thwart? Who was the first villain you guys thwarted when you first became a team? Cool. Jotting that down for future campaigns.
Is that not the same thing as that other stuff that I just said? Like, you're all tied to one minor villain.
Yeah, I just don't play it out. Like, I don't play that stuff out. I'm just like, ask a few questions.
These weren't like scenes that they played out. These were exactly what you're talking about.
All right, then I'm talking about the opposite. When people are like, "Cool, Chris, you've entered town.
No,
where do you go? Bob,
there's no reason to do that.
Bob, you've entered from the West Gate. Where are you heading?" And then we play like a whole fucking session for you guys to finally wind up in the bar.
No.
Yeah, no, I'm like, that's the shit I'm talking about. Yeah. Sorry, I'm gonna get off my soapbox.
No, I hate that stuff.
Yeah,
I don't want the slow intro.
Oh, rainbows. Oh, I like those.
Yeah, I want to talk about what happened in the past and then play in the present.
All right, I'm 100% with you then. Sorry. Oh, rainbows. Yeah. You know what's cool? I was reading Things from the Flood this morning on the plane. Mm-hmm. So in Things from the Flood, you're all friends, but one of the things you have to define as a group is what is the friction in your group.
Oh, nice.
And they give you some examples, but it's like one of you wants to hook up with somebody else in the group or whatever, but there's this, like, they tell you have to define a friction within the group that yes, you will all help each other and yes, you are friends, but this thing is hanging over your group at all times.
That's pretty cool.
Until you resolve it, and then there's another, and then create a new friction.
Avi had another one. Avi said, I enjoyed a Dungeon World game I started where the PCs were inside an ancient ruined city fleeing from a giant werewolf.
Boom. That's how we get the game going.
Mm-hmm.
That's a Chris start.
Yeah. He went on to say, some of these favorite introductions seem to be starting in media res. Is that a consistent theme? I mean, I'm a fan of in media res.
I'm a fan of in media. So I have a one GMing style thing that I like to do, which is an in media res opening. Mm-hmm. But then I stop in the middle of the in media res, ask a few flashback questions, and then resume the in media res. Like, I like that. And I'm going to equate this to movies where you see like a whole bunch of action and then like everything freeze frames. And it's like, how did we get here?
Yeah.
Like Deadpool,
mm-hmm.
right? Like where he does that whole thing where he gives you the whole background before he jumps on Francis.
Yeah. It's so funny.
Yeah. But I will use it.
It's also an excellent storytelling technique.
Yeah, I mean, I use it for Hydra Hackers in Busted Maine uses that, where I start in the action, then I stop, and I'm like, cool. Here's why you guys are involved with this. Ask you a few questions. Cool. Let's get back to the water gushing out in the basement. Yeah, I like those a lot.
Mm-hmm. Even when I start in media res, like I still need to do a little bit so the characters can know who they are.
Oh yeah,
and know each other.
Yeah.
I still want them to know each other, like, because that is play, but that is not the first scene.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about with the introduction, I suppose, is what is the first scene of play. So there we go. That was our topic for chatter last.
That was good. I got to make sure I subscribe so I can jump in and chat with you guys.
So let's talk about some other stuff for a few minutes at least. Bob, tell me about things since you've gotten to be fairly chill this episode.
Things. What did I put on the things list? Sorry, I was typing an answer to a question. I have finished Runaways Season 2 finally. I got through that.
I thought it's pretty good.
It was good. It did not go where I thought it was
It
going
is
to
not
go.
the same as the comic.
It is not the same, and it did one of those things where it's like you get about halfway through the season and you're like, oh, that really would have been fine for a season finale to me, but we're not halfway. We're like, okay, we have more other stuff. Okay, good, whatever. So that was kind of surprising. And I've actually been catching up on my reading for pleasure. I've finally kind of gotten into a groove with managing my time a little bit better, and I've been carving out some time to sit down with a book. Not long ago, I finished Thin Air by Richard Morgan. I'm currently about 2/3 of the way through Medusa's Web by Tim Powers, and when that is done, I will have gotten in the mail, hopefully tonight, A Little Hatred by Joe Abercrombie, which I am dying to jump into because it's a new novel in the world of the First Law trilogy. So brand new stuff.
That's interesting.
So yeah.
I wonder if Drew's read it. He loves those books.
I would imagine Drew probably pre-ordered it, and I'm going to go poke him at some point on Messenger and say, hey, did you pre-order? Because if not, ha ha ha, because mine will be in hand.
Secret weapon of the show, Drew Smith.
Secret weapon of the show. And I'm 0-2 in fantasy football. Booyah.
I'm 1-1. I beat Evil John this week.
Yeah, Evil John and I are sitting at the bottom of the pack at 0-0, 0-2.
Phil.
I've been reading Things from the Flood in preparation for my upcoming campaign. I'm really excited. It's just as good as I remember it. It's got a nice. It's a little different than Tales from the Loop. It is a little deadlier. There are a few little rule changes where all of a sudden I'm reading and I'm like, whoa, damn, like that's a little more serious. But it is the exact same. Beautiful artwork. Simon, I believe it's Stalling. I forget. Yeah, Simon's artwork is amazing. The layout's great. It's very consistent with the first book. So anyway, really enjoyed that. Did get, like I said earlier, got to watch some '90s movies. Definitely kicking around an idea for the '90s teen party game. I don't know what the actual game is, but I want to play with the trope of the teen party, you know, like the when everybody comes over to somebody's house and it gets wildly out of control, and all the drama that occurs inside like the house during that.
Eventually the cops get called and everybody scrambles.
Yeah, that's the end game, right? The cops get called, everybody has to run. So yeah, but other than that, most of my week was travel. So travel good, and Denver. Denver's awesome. It's missing a lot of oxygen and water. But I did get to go. I worked one day out of Senda's office, so I got to work Senda's totally cool and hip work share office with the 7 times filtered water. I have a water dispensary in my office, which is like a 1950s water fountain.
That's funny.
Complete with all the lead that goes with it. But hers is like this 7 times filtered coconut, like whatever.
I mean, it's the lead that really gives it the tang.
There's a certain thing about the lead. But anyway, one of the cool things is that 2 blocks from Senda's office is Topo Design's headquarters and store. So I got to go to Topo Designs, look around a little at some of their bags and stuff like that, but I bought my favorite thing from Topo Designs, which is pouches. So I bought more Topo Design pouches. I have like a shit ton of these now, and they like occupy most of the inside of my bag. Like I have a Topo Design pouch.
Nice.
But I now have them in all the sizes. So I have the medium, the large. I have them in a couple different fabrics. So they're not cheap pouches. They're really nicely constructed though. Anyway, Topo was a lot of fun. So yeah, that was my thing.
Nice. What did I do this week? So yesterday we did our test and our final cast selection for the FM Gamers. That was fun. We were all set up in here and everything. That was enjoyable with multiple cameras and all that good stuff. So I did that. I played my Eberron game last week, Wednesday. That was a good time with the Wednesday Evening Podcast All-Stars. our second session of that. We had fun trolling around Sharn, getting to know their characters a little bit more in their neighborhood and where they live and the people that they know.
Cool.
And also getting deeper into some of the espionage stuff and what's going on in the background. I'm leaning super hard on World War II ideology. Like the Morning was actually a super weapon, and there's pieces of it around still, like the spell that made it happen that people want. So
Cool.
the Manhattan Project kind of thing.
Nice.
It's pretty fun. So they're involved in that. There's a bunch of Kickstarters going on. I'm not going to talk about all of them. The one that I do want to talk about is 10 Workers. It's the Christopher Gray one. That's why.
Yeah. It's a short Kickstarter. I forget. I haven't looked at the details on it.
Yeah,
I was going to punch it up really quick.
I kept a whole super track of it either, but it's supposed to be like 10 candles, but in reverse.
What's it called?
Yeah. 10 workers.
I have no idea how the game works, but it sounds fascinating from the little bit that I heard about it. Like, instead of losing
10
dice
workers
and-
united.
10 workers
10 workers
united.
united. Instead of losing dice,
It's
as you
a
go along,
it's a 29-day. It's a 30-day Kickstarter.
So it's a 30-day,
Yeah.
but
But it's
is
a
the ask
zine.
pretty small?
it's it's supposed to be a zine.
250.
Yeah.
Yeah.
$250. They're already at 637
Yeah.
with 54 backers.
It's because it comes in zine format. That's the idea.
Yeah.
But the dice, instead of losing them over the course of time and things like that, you gain them.
The workers gain them.
Workers gain
Yeah.
them, so that that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I'll have to look deeper into
Yeah.
it.
There's more context about that, but if you've been following Twitter, you know why. Yeah, what else? Punk Apocalypse.
Punk Apocalypse.
Punk Apocalypse Kickstarter.
That's
Is
the Punk Apocalypse. That's the new Robert Schwab game based on the Shadow of the Demon Lord.
Yep.
Actually, it's been being playtested for like years. Like this game has been getting ready to go for a while. It's also based on. I don't think it was originally supposed
It's
to
a
be
minis
this game.
game or something.
It was a minis game. This is the role playing game
Yeah,
of it.
yeah.
But it was like he had this idea for this game a while ago, and I think he got together with these people to make this version of it.
Nice.
So it's based on something that he'd been working on for a while. These two things just kind of like met up though in like the setting and his game that he was building. They worked really well together. That's the story that I hear about it. And we can talk about that Root Kickstarter next week
Sure.
because we'll
That'll
look
be going
into
on.
it.
Yep.
I don't know anything. I've never played Root. That's why.
I'm surprised you haven't. It's supposed to be very good. And I'm
People say
surprised
it's
Mo hasn't talked about
I
it
don't
yet.
know anybody who has it.
There was a time where it was super hard to come by.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll go and play it at Gathering Game, the game cafe that I hang out at. I'm sure they have it. Somebody just asked, "What's the new Rob Schwab game?" It's called Punk Apocalypse.
Yep.
It used to be a minis game. No, it is a minis game, but there's a role playing game of it now that Schwab has designed, based on the minis game in the setting.
Yeah. See, that's the thing, right? It's so Root is asymmetrical.
Yeah.
It's an asymmetrical game about forest creatures trying to accomplish their
Yeah,
goals.
and if Jason says it's worth playing, it's obviously worth playing. So.
I've heard nothing but the best things about it.
Yeah, me too.
I've wanted to play it for the longest time. I have it on my wish list, my Amazon wish list, but it was out forever.
There's a fascinating PDF released by Monty Cook Games, that Consent in Gaming PDF.
It was excellent.
Yep.
We talked about it. You and me talked about it last week.
We talked about it online.
We didn't talk about it or online, not on the show.
I
thought
don't- no, we
talked about it at dinner
No,
last week.
we talked. No, you know what? We talked about it. We were at the tail end or the beginning of one of the meetings.
Yeah, that's right.
Online, we were talking.
So the fun thing was like a lot of us, because we've been talking about it for years and years at this point, or at least a couple of years at this point. This idea of consent in gaming and safety tools and things like that. This article doesn't use all the terminology that we're all familiar with.
Not the article, the publication, right? It's like 13 pages. I read it on the flight. I read it on the flight out to Denver.
Yeah, it doesn't use all the terminology that we're accustomed to.
It's my only critique about it.
But it's really good terminology for people who don't use or understand the terminology that we're
Right.
accustomed
I
to.
feel like the one thing they missed in that PDF was it would have been nice in parentheses to have referenced these other tools, because there is a greater community of people who are familiar with these tools and they are named in other games, and it would be helpful if somebody who is first learning about it, like, I think it's a great on-ramp, right? So I think it's great. If you're targeting Monty Cook Games audience for, introducing consent in gaming and stuff like that, I think this PDF is fantastic.
It would have been nice if they would have put, like, in the back of the article at least, like, here are some other things that you might want to go look at, like the X card or script.
Well, no,
change,
now
or...
they did put X card in because they do reference specifically X card. But like for instance, they talk about lines and veils and open door, but don't reference them by name.
Oh.
So they say like there are sometimes there's content in game you only want to talk a little bit about, and sometimes you don't want to talk about it at all. And I'm like, that's lines and veils. And then they're like, sometimes you're gonna need to get up from the table and walk away. And that's okay, and I'm like, that's open door.
And they could have put a list at the back or something like that.
Or just in parentheses, could have just put like open door, and then like in the back, you could have just looked and been like, oh, this is the open door policy. Like again, it sparked a whole bunch of conversation. One, it greatly increased my block list on Twitter.
Yeah.
I just went and read the announcement and was like, ass hat, ass hat, ass hat, ass hat. Like, and it was really easy because the people who like objected to it, as soon as you click into their Twitter, you're like, shitlord, block. Like, and they're all the same thing, right? You click into them and it's like 17 followers.
Yeah.
And it's like, whatever.
They open with the statement, I pity anybody who needs to use this crap in their game. Like,
I'm like, I pity anyone who goes on a date with you. If you can't respect the fundamental concept of
a game?
Of consent in gaming, how the hell are you gonna do it on a date? Block. Yeah, it was great. I'd have like I said, I must have picked up 20 blocks in like 15 minutes.
Good stuff though.
It's good. Trust me, I don't want to say anything bad about it. It is wonderful. It is my only critique is if they would have just referenced the existing tools, because a lot of people have put a lot of work into creating those tools, and to have them credited by Monty Cook Games would help them.
Oh, that would have
it would have added a lot. It would have added a lot of credibility to the work that they've already done.
All right, let's do some Patreon shoutouts then.
Yeah.
Do it.
Right. Joseph Peralta, Mike Amer, Ninjabi, Rainmaker, Richard Duane, Rory McLeod, Savannah Sizer, Scott Ryder, Sean P. Kelly, Steve Bissonette, Steve Radabaugh, The Tabletop Bellhop, Tad Leckman, T. Kustik, and Theodore Atkinson.
You know what we didn't mention?
What?
Just do the beginning of the closing and we'll get to it.
Thanks to everybody for listening tonight.
If you're free on Tuesday evenings, 8 p.m. Eastern, the time zone I'm in right now, or 6 p.m. the Queen time, the time zone I woke up in.
I heard it was Her Majesty's time.
Yeah, it's whatever. It's the same. Come join us live on Twitch, where you can chat with other listeners in the awesome chat room for life and ask us the occasional question.
You know, if you can't make it to that live show, you can check out our podcast each week wherever you get your podcasts. You can also take a listen to some of the other shows in the Misdirected Mark Network, such as Down with D&D, Bone Star and Obsidian, Pandas Talking Games, The Gnome Cast, Zhang Yu Hustle, She's a Super Geek, and Bonus Experience. You can and should also check out our sibling podcasts, Tabletop Bellhop, The Knights of the Night, and the always amazing 5 years running now, Gaming and BS.
Congratulations, Brett and Sean.
Yes.
5
Brett
years.
And Sean.
Oh my god, I just figured out what the BS
You need not bullshit?
Right. Maybe a little both.
Oh.
Anyway, congratulations, Brett and Sean, for 5 years running.
It's been so awesome to have you all as friends and
eventually partners.
Partners,
yeah,
and everything.
I mean, I remember when we went on their show and they came on our show. Like, I mean,
so much fun.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
We really should do that again sometime.
We should.
You know what else people should do?
You want me to finish this closing?
Yeah.
After you have covered all of your questions in Trappings, send them to us for some feedback. You can reach us directly via email, mmp@misdirectedmark.com. Check out our ever awesome Facebook group. And check us out on Twitter. I'm at DNA Phil. He is at Robert M. Everson. He is at The Light 101. And the show and the network is at Misdirected Mark.
If you like what we do here and on the other shows in the Misdirected Mark Network, you can support our Patreon campaigns. MMP, Down with D&D, and Pandas Talking Games are at patreon.com/MMP. She's a Super Geek is at patreon.com/SassGeek. Zhang Hustle is at patreon.com/Zhang Hustle. And last but certainly not least, Bonus Experience is at patreon.com/Bonus Experience. Patrons of MMP, Down with D&D, and Pandas Talking Games get access to the after show, pre-production show notes, musical parodies, the Pandas Talking Games bonus outtakes, and other special releases.
We really need to make another parody at some point.
We do.
Like, it's been a long time.
I mean, I have one that's coming up that we can probably do for the holiday season if Sunday has time.
Oh, that'd be
Okay.
good.
You made it last year.
Big Master.
Big Master.
Master.
Well, this has been a Misdirected Mark production, since we're going to the after show, apparently, with Big Master. The media arm, or Big Master of Encoded Designs, Mic Drop.
We out!